Hey there, friends. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Sarah, and today we are finally putting 2022 behind us. So today I want to talk about everything that I've read in 2022. It was overall a really good reading year for me. This is where I want to talk about all of my stats, and I've never done a video like this before. I have watched what feels like probably 30 videos this year of everybody talking about their reading stats, and I want to do the same thing. I want to talk about what I read and kind of what I have learned through the process. So where I track predominantly is on Goodreads, and then I also use the CawPile spreadsheet. It's a Google sheet, but yes, I'm going to refer to it a million times as a spreadsheet. This was created by G from Book Roast. I will leave her latest version linked down below. I'll leave her video where she introduces her latest version and all of the updates that she has made. I am using the 2023 version, which I think is version 4 now. 2022 was my first year using it. And I will say, if you are not really sure how to rank a book or how to rate a book with the 5-star method, CawPile is a great way to do so. It takes, you individually rank your characters and the world building and all these different criteria, and then at the end it will give you your star rating or even a half-star rating. And so I found that I was very loyal to ranking everything by CawPile at the beginning of the year. And then as the year went on, I kind of got a little bit more comfortable in my own, I don't want to say judgment, but kind of my own judgment, where I could really tell what was going to be a 3 or a 3.5 to me versus what was going to be a 4, and so I continued to use CawPile, and I did, for the most part, rank or rate every book, but part of the way through the year, I just started giving them my own star ratings and didn't so much use the actual CawPile portion of it, but I do like the tracking portion of the spreadsheet as well, where you can say, this is the date that I started the book, and this is when I ended, so it took me 6 days to read it, and this is a female author, or this is a non-binary author, or so at the end of the year it will produce a spreadsheet like this, and you can see all the different breakdowns of what type of authors you read, what type of books and genres you read. And what I like to kind of look at is how many pages I read each month, or how many books I read each month. So that's actually where we're going to start. Overall, my CawPile spreadsheet shows that I read 155 books this year. Technically, I finished 153 books this year, and that's because there are 2 that I started and I did not finish. Now, I'm not counting those as DNFs because there is another category where you can DNF a book. I am not counting these 2 books as DNFs because I do intend to go back and finish these books. I just didn't have time. I started reading them both in November, and in the month of November and December, I was really working hard to finish my 52 book challenge, and I was using each of these books toward prompts for that. But what I found was it was taking me so long to get through these books. They both are just books that require a lot of brain power. And so one of them is just like really, really intense. And I found that I couldn't read more than say 10 or 15 pages at a time. And my goal is 100 pages a day. So you can see where that was putting me behind really quickly. And then the other one, it's a little bit more of a technical book. I'll just tell you, it's Hamnet, and it's written by Maggie O'Fallon, and I've heard so many great things about this book, but it's kind of that like Shakespearean speak sort of. So it just was taking too much of my brain power, and I wasn't getting through the material as quickly as I wanted to. And so I did set those to the side for the time being, not technically DNFing, but that's why my spreadsheet actually shows that I read from 155 books, but I technically only finished 153 for the year. Speaking of DNFs, I am DNFing one series that when I started reading it, and technically I listened to the audiobook, I didn't even know it was a series. I listened to the audiobook called Text Me on Tuesday, and this is part of the Accidentally in Love series. It was terrible. I didn't enjoy it at all. So I will be DNFing and just not continuing on with that series. Breaking down by month, my best month for number of books read was actually November, which is funny because that was the month that I didn't technically finish those 2 books that I was talking about, but I did fully read 18 books. So my spreadsheet shows 20 books because I started 2 and then I started and finished 18 books. So interestingly enough, the majority of those were audiobooks. In the month of November, my audiobook listening total was 95.5 hours. Whereas pages read, I only read 1,625. So I thought that was really interesting, that was by the number of books read, it was my highest number, but I think because I was trying to push through and finish that challenge, I was reading a lot of audiobooks, and I also was reading a few shorter books that I could put in there that would fill the prompts for the challenge. And I am planning to do, or I am participating in the 52 book challenge for 2023 as well. I have not filled out all of my my whole spreadsheet for what I'm planning to read. I was intending to do a 52 book club wrap-up video, and I don't know if I'm going to have time for that this month. I'm trying to post 2 videos a week, and so if that's something that you want to see, let me know. I will definitely try to, I'll make an effort to do one video solely dedicated to my 52 book challenge for 2022. But what I'm also planning on doing is a basically planning video for what I'm planning to read to fulfill the challenge for 2023. So hit 18 books completed in the month of November, and number of pages, my best reading month was June. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all. We went on a long family vacation in the month of June. We went on vacation with some of our friends, and we stayed in their condo. And for a lot of the time, my son and I just stayed at the condo, and I spent a lot of that time reading. So my page count for the month of June was 2,907 pages. So I read almost 3,000 pages just in the month of June. And I can't remember if I read like 8 books in 9 days, or if I read like 6 books in 8 days or something like that. I can't remember, but it was like almost a page a day almost a book a day for the entire time that we were there. So that was a really great reading month for me. I also read a lot of books that I really enjoyed. So that was, that was a good month for me. The lowest page count that I read was in the month of May. So the month right before it, I had my lowest page count, and that was 1,344. Hang on. Yeah, 1,344. I do have my laptop right in front of me, but I can't wear my glasses when I'm on camera. So sometimes I have to like get super close to my screen so I can make sure that I'm reading the numbers right. So in the month of May, lowest page count. Very next month, the month of June, my highest page count. So I think that's kind of interesting. For my audiobooks, oh, and I didn't tell you the total number of pages that I read for the year. So the total number of pages that I read for the year was 25,919 pages. So almost 26,000 pages that I read, which I thought was super cool. Now, I need to bring up my Goodreads because Goodreads does just total pages. They don't track between audio versus physical pages. So I need to bring up my challenge from last year and see what I read overall. Dang it, where is that? Oh, 2022 year in books. There we go. So my 2022 year in books, according to Goodreads, is 55,404. I don't know if you can see that, but there you go. 55,000. Why did I say 404? God, I don't know, y'all. Total pages read 55,400. So there we go. That would be all combined, not separating out audio versus physical books, but actual physical pages was almost 26,000 of that. My total numbers of audio that I listened to was 899.5. Now, I'm sure somewhere in there I forgot to put on a half an hour because I only started tracking partial hours toward the end of the year. So I'm sure that's an over 900 hours that I listened to. That's pretty amazing to me. I think that's pretty awesome. I'm manipulating my spreadsheet and I'm not trying to. So how that broke down was my best listening month for audiobooks was actually in January, which was really kind of funny to me. I didn't realize that January was my best listening month. I listened to 116 hours in the month of January. And then my lowest reading month was the month of March, and I only listened to 32 hours of audiobooks in the month of March. And that totally tracks for me because I was speaking at a conference in the month of March. And so a lot of my time for March was spent either prepping for the conference where I was rehearsing my speech and connecting and in different meetings and different Zoom calls and things like that in the preparation phase for my conference, and then actually being at the conference for 4 days. I was basically sitting in classrooms and sitting in different keynotes and things like that, and then actually giving my speech. And so the only during that entire week that I was at the conference, the only reading time I got in, physical or audio, was on my drive down to Austin, which was about 4.5 hours, and then on my drive back. And so that was all I got for that whole entire week. So it doesn't really surprise me that I basically missed out on a whole week of reading that month. So the numbers kind of make sense that I only got 32 hours for the whole month. Okay, I've got my Stanley. We can carry on. P.S. This is the best cup ever. I got it for Christmas because I told my mom I really, really wanted this color. It's beautiful and I love it. And it has helped me drink so much more water. I feel like every year I go on this kick where I'm like, I'm gonna be good to my body. And then I fall apart. But there's so many nice features about this cup. I like that it has a handle. I like that it can hold a lot, and it can hold a lot of ice. So like you don't fill the whole cup up with ice and then there's no room for water. You can have a whole bunch of ice and still have a whole bunch of water in this cup. And it's a hard plastic straw. It's not a silicone straw because those feel really weird and kind of taste funny in my mouth. So I don't care for them. So get you a Stanley if you don't have one, because your body will thank you. All right, there's the end of my commercial, not sponsored at all. Next, I want to talk about the breakdown of the reading method, essentially, or how I read these books. So I've already talked about how audiobooks are far and away my most popular way to read books. For all of last year, I read 87 audiobooks, and then my physical book count was 59. And then the remainder of that was by ebook. Now, I only read 8 books on my Kindle last year, and I do have a goal to increase that number this year. I don't really know why I don't remember to read on my Kindle that way. I bought it for myself for my birthday, not this past year, but like a year ago. And that was one of the big sellers. You know, I can take it anywhere, and I can, I can always have a book with me. But guess what? I just always have a book with me anyway, because I either have a physical book or I'm listening to an audiobook. So I do have a goal to read more on my Kindle this year, mostly just so I can prove to my husband that I really did need it. My average book length for the year was 364 pages. I did read in the beginning of the month. I know why January was such a big audiobook month, because I listened to the majority of the Outlander series by audiobook. I think I only read 2 of them on Kindle, and so I listened to the majority of them at the beginning of the year on audiobook, and that's why the hours are so high. So I did read some chunkier books like that, but then I also started listening to the Nancy Drew Diaries series, and I think I read maybe like 12 or 14 of those by audiobook. And so the Outlander series obviously increased my average length of the book, but then books like the Nancy Drew series, which are anywhere from like 160 to 200 pages each, that significantly decreased my average page count. So my average length of book read was 364 pages. Let's see. Goodreads says my average rating was 3.8. I would say that's probably about accurate. And then my highest rated was A Court of Mist and Fury. I still need to finish that series this year. I think I'm going to do it like probably in the next month or 2. Not January, because I kind of already have that planned out, but maybe in February. That would be a good time to finish the series. My most read genre, there's kind of 2 that are right up there at the top. Romance came in at 23.9%, so that was 37 books. And contemporary came in at 20%, and that was 31 books. So that doesn't really surprise me. Romance is kind of what got me into reading when I was much younger, and it's always kind of been my go-to genre because I like the feel good. I never read a thriller before last year, not on purpose anyway. And so romance and kind of contemporary have always just been my go-to. I like the feel good. My life is stressful enough. I'm not asking for any additional stress or any additional drama generally. So I like the feel good. That accounts for like 68. So yeah, almost 50% of what I read, like 40% or something like that. About 44% of what I read was either romance or contemporary. That doesn't surprise me at all. What surprises me is what comes next, and that is that 19 of the books that I read were fantasy, which was not even on my radar before last year. 18 of the books were thriller, which shocked the hell out of me. Let me just tell you, I never would have thought that I would voluntarily read 18 thrillers in a single year, much less like my entire life. And then 17 were mystery, which I also thought was really interesting. So those are all kind of really, really close, and you could almost kind of clump those together. For me, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between what is mystery and what is thriller. So thriller for me is a little bit more psychological, and mystery is more of just like a whodunit kind of a thing. You know, there's a crime, typically a murder, you know, who did it? And it's just more just straightforward tracking the steps to figure out and solve the mystery. But thriller typically has a little bit more of a psychological element to me. I don't know if that's right, but this is my spreadsheet and this is how I keep track. So there we go. And then another one that was really high on the list was historical fiction. And I read 13 historical fiction last year. So that's kind of cool. Didn't really realize that. So those were my highest. Now I did have a few others, like nonfiction. I read 9. I know that I listened to an audiobook from Brené Brown. We did an autobiography for book club one month. So some of them were books like that where, that's like typically the kind of nonfiction that I listen to. I can't really think of what other nonfiction books I have read. So I don't know. That's kind of surprises me to see that there's 9 of them for last year. But that's where the majority. I've got a couple that are magical realism. I read 2 classics, which I trudged through, and then a couple of biographies, and that's about it. I did read across 14 different genres for the year. So that's kind of a good, kind of a fun statistic to know that I am branching out. I'm not just going to my typical romance, although let's be honest, that's where I lead the majority of the time. But I did read across 14 genres for the year. So that's kind of a fun, just a fun thing to know. The next breakdown is star rating, and this was kind of interesting to me. I want to go ahead and talk about my stars and half stars, because there is a pretty big difference to me between, a 3.5 and a 4 star, or sometimes even a 4 and a 4.5. So I want to go over how I broke all of those down. My smallest category, this was nice to see. My smallest category was 2.5 stars. And really, I don't rate a lot of books. I don't know that I've ever rated a book 1 star. I have rated, I would say, a handful 2 stars or 2.5 stars. And really, if I'm rating it 2 stars or even 2.5, I'm just giving credit to the author for making it through the writing process and the publishing process and getting a book out there in the world. It's not my cup of tea. There was something about it that I didn't like. Maybe several somethings about them that I didn't like. But I will say this, the 3, so my 2.5 stars, I rated 3 books this year, 2.5 stars. And off the top of my head, I think I know exactly what 3 books those are. So I'll say this, they stick with me. Whether I enjoyed them or not, they definitely stick with me. So there you go. My next highest rating, so that was my lowest. I only rated 3 books for the whole year, 2.5 stars. My next lowest was 3 stars, and I rated 9 books 3 stars. So that's just okay. It was a good book. I could see where there was some merit there. It just is not going to make any favorites lists. My next highest was 5 stars. So I actually rated 17 books this year 5 stars. And I know a few of them, like off the top of my head. One of them I absolutely cannot stop thinking about, and I recommend it to every single person that talks to me about books. So that's really, but I can't name all 17 off the top of my head. I think that's interesting. My next highest was 4 stars. So I rated 19 books, just straight up 4 stars. Really good books. Probably not going to be on my favorites list, but still solid material, solid writing, and that I enjoyed. 19 books I rated 4 stars. Next is 3.5 stars, and I rated 25 books this year 3.5 stars. So I would say some of those did come from my actually inputting all of the CAWPILE ratings, and then it came up with the 3.5 star rating. But a lot of them I just knew by, like I said, about the middle to the end of the year, what I would consider a 3.5 star versus a 4 star. It just needed a little bit extra to bump it up to that 4 star, and it just didn't have it for me. But 25 books had a 3.5 star rating, which is still a solid rating. So by far, my largest category was 4.5 stars. So there were obviously a lot of books that I read where, maybe there were a few pages in the middle where I kind of lost the plot line, or maybe it just didn't have as solid of an ending as I wanted, or maybe it was just a little bit too predictable, but I still felt like it was a great book and definitely would, I don't want to say definitely, would likely be one that I would recommend. So still super strong book, solid rating, 4.5. I rated 33 books this year, 4.5 stars. So between 4.5 and 5 stars, that was 50 books. So that was about a third of my reading this year was really, really good reading, 4.5 to 5 stars. So that's encouraging to me. I have started this year to read a lot of the trendy books, the books that you see on BookTube and the books that you see on Instagram, and, the ones that are coming up in Book of the Month and, on BookTube, and I am enjoying them. So I guess that's a good thing. Breaking things down by age category, the lowest or the smallest age category that I read from this year was young adult. I still have a little bit of a hard time differentiating between what should be classified as YA and typically where I will kind of make my hopefully somewhat informed decision from is when I go to Goodreads and, on the side, when you're looking at a book, it will tell you how other people have shelved the book. And so if I see YA there, that's kind of typically where I will go. That's kind of how I'll make my determination that it's a YA book if I have a question. Some things are very obviously YA, but sometimes it's a little bit difficult for me to tell. So young adult was my lowest or my smallest age category, and I only read 14 books that were young adult this year. I would say that's probably a few more than normal. I do tend to stay mostly in the adult category, which is what you're going to see here in just a minute, because my next largest category was middle grade. And I read 15 middle grade, and I'm almost certain that all of those middle grade that I read were from the Nancy Drew Diaries series. As I said, I had started listening to those earlier in the year. They all take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to listen to, and I just find that they're a nice palate cleanser. They are, yes, they're mysteries, but they are much lighter mysteries, and they are, they're not quite so intense typically, to where if I've had a really, if I've read several heavy books in a row or something that, just like really did my brain in or something, I might need just a quick little palate cleanser. So I might go to the next Nancy Drew Diaries and listen to that. So that's kind of how I've made my way through 15 middle grade for this year. And yes, I do think that that is higher than an average year for me. So this should be no surprise. If you can do the math, you'll know that 126 of the books that I read this year were in the adult category. As I said, that's pretty standard for me. I just don't know what else to say about that. 126 adult books. By far, the majority of the books that I read last year were published in either 2021 or 2022. And that also doesn't really surprise me. I get Book of the Month subscription. As I said, I was heavily influenced by BookTok and BookTube and Bookstagram. And so I was reading a lot of the books. It may or may not have been as they were coming out, but it definitely was books that were in the last year or two. So 2022 was my highest publication year last year. I read 24 books that were published in 2022, and then what does that say? I'm sorry, I read 34 books that were published in 2022 and 24 books that were published in 2021. So then after that, I read a ton of books that were in 2020, 10 books that were in 15 books in 2020. Sorry guys, I need to just like sit like this so I can read the computer. Sorry. 15 books that were published in 2020 and then 10 books that were published in 2019. So, right there, that's probably like half of my reading list published in the last 5 years. Again, not really a surprise to me because that's what I feel like is when, reading kind of has gotten popular again. I've always been a reader, but since I have finished my degree and I have, kind of shifted my focus from textbook reading to reading for pleasure again, that doesn't really surprise me. That's when I've become more aware of BookTube and things like that. So I'm obviously reading more that are going to be published on YouTube and so forth. The LGBTQ rep that I read this past year, I read 28 books where there was LGBTQIA plus representation. Now, I made a comment a month or so ago where I said that I didn't typically intentionally read something that wasn't necessarily, like a hetero love story. I am making I'm making a conscious effort to read more inclusively this year. So whether that is by a diverse author in, sexual orientation or representation or non-binary or, diversity as far as ethnicity goes. I am a Hispanic woman and I work in a field that is predominantly rich old white men. I say that all the time. And so I don't see a lot of people that are like me doing my job in my day-to-day life. And so I know how important diversity and inclusivity is. And I'm not even saying that that's anywhere close to LGBTQIA plus representation. I know those are two different things. I'm just trying to make a little bit of a parallel where I show that I can understand not seeing yourself in something that's important to you. That's the only parallel that I'm drawing here. So I am making an effort to read more diversely for this year. Please do not attack me. I mean this only with the best of intent. Moving on from that, one of the differentiators or one of the categories on G's spreadsheet is a disability rep. And so I only read a handful of books that had some type of disability representation. And this, might also be something that I work toward including in the books that I read. I read 4 books that had disability representation this year. There we go. I need to work on that. I need to be better about that in seeking out more representative of what our actual culture is. Next, we have, how did you get the book? So was it something that was gifted to you? Did you get it from the library? Did you already own it? I am making more of a concentrated effort this year also to track what I read when I buy it. So like, if I bought it this year, is it going to take me 5 years and it's still sitting on my shelf? You know what I mean? I bought a ton of books last year because, again, I've just started getting back into reading. So I want to make an effort to not let those books sit. I want to be reading them for the most part as I'm purchasing them. So of all of my reading, the majority of my reading actually came from my library, and I think that's pretty cool. So I got 105 books from my library. Now, again, the majority of those were the audiobooks that I listened to through Libby. Libby is amazing. And then, the books that I read on my Kindle as well. Probably most of those 8 were from my library. My lowest category for this one was gifted books, and that was 4. So I think those 4 were probably, they may have all been from Christmas last year. I can't really remember. But I read 4 books that were gifted to me, and then 46 books that I owned. So that could have been book of the month. That could have been, when I went to the Barnes and Noble sale and, pick something up. I did place a couple of orders through Thrift Books last year. So all of those would qualify as owned. Now, I don't have them by the year that I purchased them to see how long they're staying on my bookshelf, but again, that is something that I, that I am tracking going forward. And then, as I said, the majority of those, 105 of those books, did come from my library. This is just one that I will mention. I'll kind of couple this with the series stat because it almost doesn't even, it's not hardly even worth a mention. Rereads versus first time. I only had one reread this entire year, and I reread The Scarlet Letter. I read that back when I was in high school, which was a few years ago. And then I reread it again this year. That's the only book that I had ever read before that I reread this year. Every other book that I read was a first time read for me. But series versus standalone, this was one that I thought was an interesting stat. So for series books, I read 58 that were some part of the series, okay? And then for standalone books was 97. So again, a lot of these romances, it's just going to be, you're going to get all of it in the 340 pages or whatever it is, So 97 of my books were standalone books, and then 58 of them, as I said, were some part of a series. And kind of how that breaks down was that I started 18 new series this year that's not surprising. As I said, just the last year or two, I've gotten back into reading for pleasure. So I've got a lot to catch up on. I'm going to be starting new series as I find things on social media, as I see things that interest me. So not at all surprising to me that I started 18 new series this year. I did read 36 sequels this year. So that could have been, I read book 1 and then book 2 and 3, which I think is what I did with A Court of Thorn and Roses. I read book 1 and book 2 and I think book 3. So 2 and 3 both are going to be counted in those sequels. So continued on with the series for 36, and then I actually finished 6 series this year. So I think that's a pretty cool stat. I know that is something that a lot of people are focusing on, because that's we can tend to kind of get carried away with that. We can honestly, we can just keep starting new books, the next best thing, and then we forget to kind of revisit the stuff that's already on our shelves. So I think that's a pretty good stat that I finished 6 series in this year. And so sorry, I was messing with my spreadsheet and I messed it up and I had to fix it. Next, I want to talk about the breakdown by author. So we'll talk about the diversity of gender, and then also whether it was an author of color or not. So first, let's talk about an author of color. I read 13 books by a person of color this past year, which means the vast majority, again, were by white authors, non-persons of color, 142 versus 13 by a person of color. I also read from mostly women this year. So 121 of the books that I read were written by women. So go us. And then men wrote 16 of the books that I read this year. And then there's another, there is one identifier that G has in her spreadsheet that says non-binary. And then there's another one that says multiple authors. So I actually recorded 18 books written by multiple authors. Now, a couple of them, like The Golden Couple, which is written by Sarah Pekkanen and I can't remember, not Greer Hendricks. Yeah, maybe that's it. Anyway, so like there are some books where I know it's 2 women, or I know it's a woman and a man or whatever, but like I put that in multiple authors. Yes, technically if it was 2 women, I could have put it under the women category, but I didn't do that. There were 18 that were multiple authors. And again, a lot of these were the Nancy Drew Diaries. Something that I learned this year is that you will see the author as Carolyn Keene on anything that's Nancy Drew. That is a pen name, which I did not know until several months ago. So there have been men and women that have written the Nancy Drew books, all of the Nancy Drew books, but they have all written under the pen name of Carolyn Keene. So there you go. All of my Nancy Drew books that I read this year have gone under multiple authors. It's a pretty even split for me between whether it was a new to me author or whether it was an author I had read from before. I read something that was a returning author for me was 70 of the books. And then a new to me author was 85 of the books. So like I said, pretty close, almost split evenly, but I do feel like I went out of my comfort zone a little bit this year. And as I said, I started reading thrillers and I started reading middle grade and I started reading some mysteries. And so I feel like my allergies. I feel like by expanding my my genres that I'm reading, I am naturally going to be reading from new to me authors and even some debut authors. And so I do look forward to, finding new authors that I am interested in and, reading from some different types of authors. And, I'm going to find some that I love and I'm going to find some that are not going to be my favorites. So that is all of my reading stats for the entire year of 2022. Overall, I felt like it was a great reading year for me. By far the biggest, numbers-wise, reading year that I have ever had. It was my first year officially tracking anything, and for the most part, I really did enjoy what I was reading. I've enjoyed finding new genres that I like. I've enjoyed exploring new authors, and there are some that I definitely would say would be at the top of my list as far as if they've got a new book coming out. They're definitely going to be someone that I'm keeping an eye on for when I hear, when I hear something new is coming out from them. I have really, really enjoyed being on this platform and being on Instagram and just sharing what I'm reading, and I've met a ton of new people in this past year, and I certainly do hope to continue to meet more and continue to share my love of reading and my love of books. Something that's super, super exciting is that this past week, so my son is 4.5, he is in pre-K, and they started reading in his pre-K classroom this week. He's doing great so far. I'm so excited. He's excited about reading. I really, really hope to instill for him. We have read to him. I think I read to him when he was in utero. I mean, we've read to him his whole entire life. He loves books, and he, in my biased opinion, is super, super smart. So I love that he is enjoying reading, and I really, really hope to instill in him this love of reading that I have had my whole entire life. So let me know, what are you reading? What were your goals for 2020, and did you hit them? And do you have another big goal for 2023? I would love to know so I can cheer you on as well. I so appreciate your support. Find me in all the places by clicking on my links down below. And don't forget to look at G's spreadsheet as well. I have linked her video down below explaining the whole CAWPILE process and how she tracks all of her reading as well. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me for a few minutes. I hope to see you very, very soon. And until I do, happy reading. Bye.